Hey, folks, for episode 90 of the Rental Roundtable, we had another repeat guest, Dan Crowley. He's the CEO of the Peer Executive Group. So, this episode was also part of Rental Roundtable Live in Atlanta. We had 100 rental owners in Atlanta for an all day event. And the topic was reading the market, a rental playbook for 2026, really focused on how do you read all of these macro trends to understand where the rental industry is going in your neighborhood, in your backyard. We talked a lot about rate of change, 1 month, 3 month, 12 month, a lot about how the peer executive members, how they view this, how they're comparing to the competitors, how they're comparing year over year, using all these different data points. So if you want to understand how to think about where the rental market is going in your part of the country, you'll enjoy this episode.
So essentially, real quick about the peer groups, just to give you a little bit of background of why it exists. Peer groups or business analysis groups have existed in the rental industry forever, right? They were groups of individuals who get together and share information, keep it confidential to themselves, that kind of thing. And so we just formalized that a little bit in 2001, which was 25 years ago, and that group is still meeting today. So we'll be celebrating 25 years together. I still facilitate that group. We have grown the network to about 25 groups, and we add about 2 groups a year. And essentially, it's an opportunity for them to share best practices and efficiencies. One of the things I love is numbers. So we do benchmarking. How many people here remember the ARA cost of doing business survey? That was awesome, wasn't it? They don't do it anymore. So we have been doing that with peer groups every year. We have a benchmark book, and I'm not going to get into gross profit and getting your earnings up. We have Rebecca, who's going to be speaking later about improving your financials. So what I'm really here to talk about is growth. And so you heard a little bit about how growth is slowing for the industry. There are ways that you can continue your growth. If you consider yourself as your independent operation, battling against just single digit growth, there are ways to do that, to compete against that. So we're going to get into that. So what the plan here is that you will leave with a short list of ideas or indicators that matter for rental. We're really going to talk about growth rate. So we're going to look at your business from a growth rate standpoint. And then you'll have those. We'll have actions based on what's happening in the growth rate your phase that you're in your business. So the action playbooks that we have are for whether you're in a growth phase or whether you are in a little bit of a slippery slope phase, which would be more the warning phase or something like that. So keep that in mind. All right. So where do you start? So many of you in peer groups already know where this is going to start, right? Rate of change, right? So how many people here actually look at their monthly sales number? Everybody. That's great. Okay, so that's a great place to start. That's where we're going to discuss, well, so what? So I look at my sales number. What do I care? What's my number? What's the dollar amount, right? So I like to look at total sales for my particular business, and then I also want to look at rental. And if I was to choose one for a independent rental operation, I would say it would be rental first. So how many people look at their monthly sales in a column? Raise your hand, right? So it gives you some idea of what's going on. This is actually one of our members. And these were their monthly sales in equipment rental. We'll call them example rental. And what I like to do is to look at, how did I do this month versus the same month last year, right? So am I improving? Am I up? Am I down? But one of the things that we focused on, we're going to be talking a lot about trends and growth rates. And you may have heard of ITR, which is an economic outfit. They have a tendency to look at things with different growth rates. So what you see up there next to the first monthly number is the last 3 months. So now we're looking at, how did I do the last 3 months versus the same last 3 months in the previous period? So good to see the number. You want to say, like, what was our best 3 months ever? I always like to put a box around that number or whatever it might be. And then the next column is last 12 months. So that is your rolling 12 revenue number. So this is the basics, right? We should all be aware of this. We should be looking at this on a regular basis. And then we just want to say, if I'm looking at it one by one, let's go ahead and build out those columns that tell us what the rate of change is. What is the rate of change for 1 month versus the previous period 1 month, October versus October, or second quarter versus second quarter, which is the 312, or the 1212, which is really the rolling growth rate of your company. It's very important for you to look at that, because based on that rolling growth rate, you're going to get some kind of indication of how to take some certain actions in your business. And we're going to talk about that today. So now that we kind of looked at the 112, the 312, and the 1212, who cares, right? So we have a lot of people who join peer groups. And the first thing we do when you join a peer group is we go through this process of learning rate of change and why it's important to you. So a little secret sauce here for those who are not in a peer group right now. And essentially, you'll see that each one of those columns means something to you. So we'll start on the far end with the 112, right? My least favorite, but it's an early warning, right? So if you're looking at October this year versus October last year, you may see that you're down 15%. So it's just an early warning. It says, whoa, something could be going on there. The next one is the 312, where you're looking back 3 months. And really, that one is the best to start to identify a momentum shift. And I always like to think of a 3-month rate of change as kind of a lead indicator, which we'll be talking about today, for what is happening in our business. Because, so we'll get into that. And then the 1212 is really your decisive, let's take action. What are we going to do? What phase are we in? So you kind of have to know when you are in a specific phase for your business. And at that point, once you know that, you can take some action, right? So it's best for changing strategy or altering your strategy and focusing on the cycle of your business. Now, how many people here have rental operations in cold climates? Minnesota, right? So seasonality factors into your revenue, correct? Yes. So does seasonality play into any of this rate of change discussion? No, it doesn't. Thank you. That's all we need. Excellent, Steve. So Minnesota. So so it doesn't, right? Because if we're looking at October versus October, or if we're looking at 3 months versus 3 months, we're really talking about that's already captured seasonality. Like, we're not comparing summer to winter, right? And then the 1212 is a rolling 12. So again, seasonality does not play into this. And I think that's very important to note that, we have a lot of people who go, how am I doing versus how are we doing second quarter versus first quarter doesn't really mean much, right? So you kind of want to just be aware of that for your market. So we have this little note here at the bottom, which says where the turning points show up. And that really is when you start to see your rate change. So they show up in the 112 first, followed by the 312, and then followed by 1212. So I'll point that out in a graphical way in a second here. And so really what you're looking for is you don't care about the absolute dollar amounts in the sales. You want to really know, like, what direction am I going in these different areas? And then how many months go by before you take action? So you heard, both Court and Kyle talk about the fact that I'm going to be talking about the economy and lead indicators, right? So I'm leading into that. So thank you for your patience. But that's where we're going with this, is your first lead indicator is your own business. So we'll explain that a little bit further. So here is one of our members' rate of change graph. We started this about 2005. And what you're looking at here is you're seeing their 112 versus their 312 versus their 1212. So what do you notice about the 112? Anyone? Up and down, right? It's very volatile, very volatile. And that's what we expect. But as you add more months to it, you'll start to see it level out. So the 312, a little less volatile, right? And then the 1212 looks kind of smooth. And you can see that this particular company back in April of 22, they were 19% down over the previous year, same period. And then it continued to grow and improve. And then at the point when I think it was like, looks like January 2024, they were 57% above the previous 12 months, right? So all we're suggesting is depending on where you are in that level, you should be taking action on some regard. So we'll talk about what kinds of action you can take. And you can see again that they came back down to earth but yet still growing. So every rolling 12, they are growing. They're just growing at a slower rate. Currently growing, looks like at 12%. 12%. Real company, by the way. Yes, Steve. That is a great question. So the question was, do you advocate looking at same store activity versus overall activity due to the fact that the company might be going through acquisitions and buying up other additional stores? And the answer is yes, of course. That can provide some value, and certainly organic growth, which is what we call it, definitely important to look at. But I would actually also argue that from the health of the company perspective, you should be looking at it even with that. So our challenge right now inside peer groups is to say, all right, growth is slowed to single digits. What are you going to do about it? You're going to expand your geo area, your geo target. You're going to expand to multiple locations. What would that take? Are you even interested in that, right? Is it who you are? So you start to get into the deeper questions, and we're moderators, facilitators. We don't answer those questions. We put you in a room with 9 other operators and you talk amongst yourselves. And that's where hopefully it helps direct you internally with your own decision making. But certainly, good point. So appreciate that, Steve. So what you saw there was something that sort of looks like this. This is called an economic cycle. It happens in almost every case, right? You can never grow percentage-wise infinitely. I mean, you could, but you really can't, right? So eventually your growth rate will slow and it will come down. So what you're looking at here is this kind of wave, which if you don't do anything at all in your business, and you don't make any changes and you just operate, you wake up and you go to work, that's probably what you will see. It's a normal economic cycle. You're going to grow faster at times. You're going to grow slower at times. You may drop below the 0 line, which is right in the middle. And at that point, you may be losing ground, but you may recover and you may come back up, right? So those are things that naturally happen in our economy. They happen with any kind of measurement that you would look at from an economic standpoint, and certainly in your own business with your own sales. So each one of those phases, we put a letter to it. It's, courtesy of ITR Economics. We really appreciate, all the heavy lifting they've done. And certainly you'll get plenty of good information from Quipli's State of Industry report, from other people's work, Dodge Momentum. We'll talk about some of those coming up. But this is something that I think really is at the beginning, in the forefront, which is, okay, if my growth is accelerating, what should I be doing? Usually we just sit there and we're like, okay, this is great. Or maybe you double down and you start to invest more. So you can kind of see that when you're in a growth phase, when your growth rate is going from 8% to 10% to 12%, you're going to have more confidence. And so you'll be able to, pick and choose what you want to do. You may also add sales coverage and look at outbound activity. You may pre-buy. So we have an individual inside peer groups right now. He is buying massive amounts of fleet this year. And he's not doing it for 2026. He's doing it for 2027. So, a little inside baseball there. Great idea if you have the ability to do it, if you have the healthy balance sheet to do it. So that pre-buying plays in. You can tighten up your dispatch and your turn processes. So again, anyone who's having accelerating growth, great ideas. A lot of us are not having accelerating growth. Our growth rate we're still growing, but we're growing at a slower clip. So that would be the C, right? You're coming down the hill. Again, not at the 0 mark. You're growing year over year, but you're just growing at a slower clip. So this one you want to look at, possibly freezing your headcount, non-critical headcount. So that means critical headcount you would still be able to expand. You're going to cut dead inventory buys. You're going to be a little more smart about your inventory, and again, that will impact your utilization, which we'll talk about briefly. You're going to double down on your A accounts and really focus on maintaining good relationships and audit utilization by category. How many people here look at their utilization, their time utilization by category? It's a great thing. Yeah, if you're not doing it, I recommend it. It helps you make a lot of decisions around your fleet, right? So highly recommend. So we'll leave the recession and recovery ones up there, but certainly each one has it. If you're in peer groups, you get a playbook, which we'll be glad to give anybody who's in attendance today. Just give me your email and I'll send you what the playbook looks like for each. So excellent. So what you've pointed out there is what is called kind of I forget if they called it a checking indicator or a checkpoint, but it is when do you take action, right? So what you can do, there's different, I would say, key points. There is like a top of the mountain, right? So when you're in the top of the mountain between phase B and phase C, you may have slightly different behavior, right? What we recommend is when you look at I like when my 312 is leading my 1212, right? So that 312 number, that orange line, when that is leading the 1212 for 3 to 4 months. So each month you're graphing it, but when you see 3 to 4, you're totally in that phase. So start the process of doing the activity in that phase. But yeah, if you're not there, then you're kind of bouncing between the two. And there is some recommendation around that. And certainly, I know some of you who've been in peer groups, you've seen that where they call it like late B, early C, or late C, early D, right? So those are little in between stages that you can evaluate. But great question. That's actually true. Yep. Did everybody hear that previous question, just so everybody knows what was going on there? He was asking about in between those phases, right? So when you're in different points of the phases. But Kyle's question, which was great, had to say, like, where are we? So if you look at ARA comes out with numbers, everybody's got some kind of number that they come out with. And I'm going to quickly jump into that. So here is a peer group. And again, not recommended for the faint of heart to look at. But what we try to do is every one of our peer groups has a website / SharePoint page. And on that page is a rate of change graph like this. So you can find yourself on there. Some of you in the room, this might look familiar. And I'm not going to shout out which group this is. But you're seeing kind of like the growth rates from those 10 individuals who meet twice a year in a peer group. And they can discuss like what phase are they in and what they should be taking action on. Now you see the dotted gray line in the center. That's that group. So we have 25 groups doing this. So obviously, we do pull it all together, Kyle, to answer your question. So what I would recommend is that everybody understand that you are all in different rental businesses. You are not all standard rental companies with the same fleet. So what we do inside peer groups is we break it out. We look at general tool versus more heavy construction equipment. We look at, because they do talk about total sales. We look at, what is your sales mix? So we want to know how much is rental versus equipment sales, or if you're doing any kind of outside service or anything like that, or you're hybrid in some manner, or if you're in specialty rental, right? Specialty rental, they're have a different multiplier in terms of their valuations. All that kind of stuff factors in. Now, that being said, there is a general trend. And so you might have heard, I think, what was ARA last year? They said 8% growth or something for 24, little high. So, yeah. So I would suggest that what you're seeing for overall in the industry is low single growth. So let's say 3 to 5%. I can say that if you are focused on general tool and homeowner, you probably have not grown in the last 2 years. You're probably below where you've been in the past. So we have some members who are happy with being at a negative 3% growth, meaning that they're holding steady, right, on some level. If you're in heavy construction equipment, you should be really focused on double-digit growth. If you're single-digit growth, you probably can take some action because we are seeing double-digit growth. If you figure with peer groups, our average member does 11 million rental and has a fleet of 22 million. So you can see we have some of the bigger operations. Our median, meaning like out of the 250, the middle person's doing like 3 million with a $6 million fleet. So that's the middle person. But when you look at the average, you're seeing overall, if we were to, accumulate everybody's sales, we would see probably closer to a double-digit growth. Peer groups, just from measuring versus ARA response, we're always like a couple points higher because we do focus on the bigger, heavier stuff. So what's happening there? We're really looking at longer-term contracts and things like that. A lot bigger, healthier balance sheets on some level. So that comes into play. But this particular graph is showing that some people are below that zero line in that group. So what does that mean? The key here is that you just don't want to see it. You want to be in recovery. You don't want to be coming into a recession. But you do see that there's a general downturn, especially with that purple line on the top. They were coming down towards the zero line, and they were able to actually recover. So that's by taking action. Yes, Achille. You're asking about daily or weekly? Yeah, we don't get into that. And I think even when you look at what we're looking at here, we're looking at a rolling 12 months. So we're not looking at the 1 month or the 3 month. We're really focusing on the overall shift of the company. So that was that initial slide to say what kind of action. So a warning is a warning is a warning. I wouldn't necessarily take action on a 112. I wouldn't even take action on a 312. I would want to see the 312 for 3 consecutive periods be going a certain way, and hence it's getting closer to a 12-12, right? That kind of thing. So again, you can do this in your own business. You don't need to compare it with your peers, but we like to push our company, right? So, all right, now let's move on. So that's cool. So the key here is to say, well, what are when we look at lead indicators, I think it's important to unpack why we look at certain indicators. So really it comes back to revenue, rental revenue, or equipment utilization, right? Those two things, if the economy messes with you on either one of those, you're in trouble. So you need to be aware that lead indicators regarding your fleet and utilization of your fleet might be different than lead indicators related to growth in activity, sales. So you might not have the supply to meet the demand, or you might have too much demand. You know what I mean? So that's kind of what that means. So on a macro market level, right here, I've listed some things that I would consider lead indicators, right? So If you're focused on housing starts and what's going on with the residential, you're going to also look at non-residential. In this case, the ISM PMI, I'm going to break that out for you. If you add in new orders, that will give you an idea what's going on with purchasing. Industrial production is useful because, again, it's identifying manufacturing and what's happening with some of the bigger stuff. We like in peer groups, we do a quarterly economic report for our members, and we like to look at the Dodge Momentum report. We like the Dodge Momentum Index. Again, it's just another index. So if we map an index over time, what do we get? A rate of change, right? So we like that. If you're looking at backlog, certainly when I work with equipment dealers, we're heavy into backlog and bookings. So those are as important as rate of change. So we're measuring the rate of change of their backlog and their bookings. So if you're in a dealer group, that's what we do. And again, architectural billing index, when are architects billing? What does that look like? If you've never looked it up, look it up. It's kind of cool. If you're above a 50 rating on that, that means things are going great. If you're below a 50, it means, well, we're slowing down in terms of architectural billing. So those are just some macro market possible lead indicators. I'm going to talk a little bit further about that. How are we doing on time? Okay. All right. And then the other piece on the right-hand side is money and financing signals, which, one of the challenges inside peer groups, and we see the chatter, they all have group chats and they have group emails. It has to do with the financial health of the balance sheet and having the banks understand your business and lined up behind you. So these things affect bank decisions and also things that you need to be aware of as you lean on other people for financing in your business, right? So up there, we're not going to get into it, but you can kind of see like Fed policy rate direction. Any news on that recently? What happened yesterday? They held it. Mm-hmm. They had a possibility of increasing the rate or dropping the rate, and they did not, right? So it's an indication of where the Fed's at mentally with everything right now. You can look at finance delinquency trends. Not good, by the way. So a little bit of that going on. I've worked with maybe 500 rental operations over the years. In that group of 500, there have been 2 bankruptcies. That's it. So what would that tell you about people's use of debt? They should take on more debt. So so what we find is a lot of people like the comfort of not having debt, and just purely from an economic standpoint, we're very pro debt. We know that fuels growth, and we know that when a person does not go out and do their fleet growth, you have to look at refreshing your fleet, but you also have to grow your fleet. If you're not doing that, you're good luck. Your utilization would have to go up 10, 15% in order for you to make an impact on your business. So just be aware that the way your business survives is through fleet and fleet growth. Any questions, comments, counter comments? Josh, anything to add to that? And then, of course, unemployment claims, being able to do the work that you're selling. Yes. I would actually, on a short note, I keep an eye on architectural billing index. I focus more on Dodge Momentum. So they mean different things to you. You have to decide or discuss which ones you're going to follow, because sometimes they may be counterintuitive when you look at them, and we're gonna address that. So real quick here, we do this for event rental, believe it or not. So we have I have a whole nother slide deck specifically for event rental, very similar. But this particular slide is cross-industry. So it looks at event rental and equipment rental. And we're looking at inflation and how inflation and costs, things to look for and be concerned with regarding your own business from a front-end standpoint. And then the last one over there is your internal early warnings. So this is quote to conversion rate. You guys are laughing because none of you do quotes, right? So do you do quotes? Does anybody do quotes? All right, a little bit. Pipeline value by event date. So these are, again, for both event and equipment. utilization by category, core versus your specialty, average lead time, and again, that's more event rental, and then AR aging, right? So couple different things there. By the way, how often should you be looking at these indicators or looking at some indicator? What's the rhythm of looking at this stuff? Has anybody done any of this? Looked at indicators beyond their own numbers? Yes, some head nods. Okay. So what we recommend is we recommend that you do this review during, like in peer groups, we encourage annual planning. So if you do annual planning with your business, sometimes you'll do what is called a SWOT analysis. And the SWOT really focuses on your strengths internally and weaknesses internally. But then there's this external element that you have to plan for, which is your opportunities and your threats. We recommend that you identify a couple of things to look at that would be your lead indicators and share that with your team, make it part of your leadership discussions. So, at least annually, you should be paying attention to what's happening in the market and where it's going. Anybody who gets a quarterly report can get it more frequently, and it's useful if you look at it. Yes, Josh. Yeah, so we do, again, if you're predominantly aerial, we'll throw that into specialty, but I look at specialty to include rental with service. So if you're highway focused or you're doing some kind of hybrid activity where you have a service tied to a type of equipment product. And again, you can obviously, anytime you get into the magazines, you can see kind of where the specialty operators are. Most people in this room are probably, I would say, focused with earth moving equipment or some level of that. Anybody here not earth moving? Okay, and what do you do? Perfect. Power. So power would be another one. We have some groups that are power equipment, generators and things like that. We would consider that specialty. And appreciate the question. And we've had you guys, I think, at different times talk to those groups and focus on, how you evaluate the value of your business in specialty versus general rental. Has anybody here added a specialty to your business, your rental business, that you feel like, oh, that's a line we typically don't do, and then we jumped into it? Traffic control, perfect. Great example. That's a good example. Anything else? Concrete polishers, service tied into that. Remember that back in the day? So there's different ways that you can grow your sales outside of just, waiting to get more clients in your specific markets, right? So just be aware that you can be more proactive. Hydraulic hose repair. Yep. Correct. So moving directions that can help you. And again, this goes back to when you're thinking about your business, what do I need to do to get to double-digit growth? It may be that you need to get you have to do an acquisition. You need to acquire more. We use a phrase market share, which when you're in the dealer world, it's really easy to identify market share. It's a little more difficult from a rental perspective, but we had one group actually model it out, courtesy of AI, and they were able to determine their market share for their rental operation in a specific town, which was kind of cool. So you're going to see more of that kind of investigation. Okay, so one-page dashboard. What does that mean? What we recommend you do is to start the process of looking at this data and getting comfortable with it and try to make sense of it, okay? So this right here was useful. It says, here's some indicators. Here's why that indicator matters. And then here's the lead time. And by the way, if anybody wants the slide deck, just give me your email afterwards and I'll shoot it over. I don't know, Court, if you can help me out with that. But so the ISM PMI is focused around Purchase Managers Index, and it gives you an idea of direction of business activity, and it gives you an inflection signal. So similar to what you guys were talking about, When's the inflection happen? When do we need to be concerned? So be aware that housing starts is early cycle signal, right, in advance residential related demand. So 6 to 12 months out from equipment rental. So you're going to look at your own rate of change. And if you look at the rate of change of that particular indicator, you should see you should see a different wave, and that's going to be potentially your wave 6 to 12 months from now. So just be aware how they impact. And you see the last one there is your own rate of change. It's a reality check. Your market beats national averages. How am I doing? It's just giving you an indicator for the next 3 months, what you're up against, right? So it's a lead indicator. Any question on that? I'm going to get into some of this results in a second. So this was fun. This was a deep dive I did. Has anybody heard of Fred? Raise your hand if you heard of Fred. Oh, we got one guy. Ooh, I like it. So Fred is the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis's tool that looks at every possible indicator in the world, right? So this particular one is that first. So that first one, ISM PMI. I just wanted to check it out. Now, I will tell you this. Hard to do this on your own because what pops up on your screen is not a rate of change. It's not a rolling 12. So it took me a little figuring out. You can see the little edit on the right-hand side in order for me to figure this out. And then I think the next slide, voila, I was able to do it, right? So now I'm looking at their rate of change for that particular index. And if you saw previously, this is saying it's a 3 to 6 month lead indicator for equipment rental, specifically equipment rental. So you can get into this. It's total private construction spending, manufacturing in the U.S., and gives you the sources. You can, again, if you're going to do this, be really careful. You can see that this only goes to 2024. So this particular sheet doesn't do you any good. What you would have to do is then search out and find the more recent data. Fred's going to give you like the idea, and you can kind of like use it to match up. Does this work? And then what I recommend you do is to start the investigation of where you can get current data to download. I just did this like last minute to kind of throw it up so we can talk about how you would go about doing this, right? But yeah, so that goes way back. For you to start your own rate of change, you really need to just go back 36 months from today. So just take your previous 36 months and get it into this type of graph format. So it's easier to stay in touch with a source that can do the heavy lifting for you. And in most cases, there's not significant costs associated with it. So we have different people listed up there who can do this kind of work. Quipli has their state of the economy report. We do a quarterly review that is on our website, which, by the way, is not behind a paywall. So you can actually go on our website, click on news, and find our latest economic review. All we're doing is we're pulling together from different sources. So you're going to see Dodge Momentum in there. You're going to see different ITR data. And again, deeper dive on it. ARA does the same thing. And if you're in a peer group, you can talk amongst yourselves as a group to decide, hey, what should we as a group look at, maybe, possibly? So what is the result of that? What is the result? What does the economy look like? So I'm going to quickly get into that. So these colors that you see might look familiar because that was the shape of that initial graph that you saw with the different colors, phase A, B, C, and D. So green means you're in accelerating growth mode. Yellow means, or orange, whatever that is, yellow, orange. That means you are in a warning phase. It means that you are growing at a slower clip than you were previously. Okay. Blue means that you are recovering. You are below where you used to be, but you're coming back up. And then red means you are going into recession mode. So when you look at this, you can see U.S. private manufacturing construction, the current 12/12 as of the end of December. I think this was off by 1 month, but the current 12/12, this is from ITR, by the way. ITR, the construction U.S. economy at a glance, December 2025. So certainly look up, it's called itrondemand.com, and you're able to get some of this information. So it'll give you each month, I believe it's monthly, it'll give you a current 12-12 circumstance, which says rolling 12, where are we at? What's the trend? It then goes and says by the end of 2025, this is where we should be. So you can see U.S. multi-unit housing starts is double digit, right? 13.5 by the end of 25, which just happened. But it's saying in 2026, it's going to pull back a little bit. So it's going to go down below the zero. It's not going to slow grow. It's actually going to drop below, and you'll be at a lower clip in 26. But again, back up in 27. So that's how you would read that. And then over to the right, you can see some of the highlights, which unfortunately is too small to read. But this says underlying demand will keep starts around current levels over the next 2 years, despite some market headwinds. So it's just giving you an idea. What we see with our peer groups is that the businesses want to make choices in their business based on what they see coming in the next couple of years. You could see 2027 is almost all growth except for private manufacturing construction. So investigate that particular indicator and find out why. Why is that negative? Everything else is showing positive. Yellow means you're growing, but you're growing at a slower clip. But you can see 26 is the prognosis is strong for these particular indicators, and then 27 you're still in a good mode. So if you've got 24 months of freeway ahead of you, is kind of we're recommending that you go strong into 2026. Have plans to expand and grow your business, essentially. So any questions on this? How many people have seen this before from ITR or from one of Noah's reports? My son, who does the economic review, right? So absolutely super useful. I love it. Their accuracy, does anybody know what ITR's accuracy is? 94.7 or something. So looking backwards, how accurate were they with this? Over 94% accuracy. So solid source for you in the future. So best things you can do right now is to go ahead and do your rate of change. And then I would identify a couple things that you feel would be useful to you. So you certainly can contact us and we'll coach you through based on what type of business you are, which indicators might mean more to you. So ITR on demand does have that type of access. You can get some good information on it. How many people here have seen Rentalytics from ARA? Okay, useful, right? Similar, gives you a picture of what's going on. You'll find in this particular case, I'm not telling you to join a peer group, but peer groups will have that kind of conversation, and they may, as a group, decide like, hey, we're going to go ahead and we're going to identify 3 things and put it on the front end. But certainly if you contact us, we'd be glad to help you with that. And then the key then is to take action. And again, that goes back to that key slide in the middle, which says, based on the phase I'm in, what should I do? Now, one of the things that's cool about the peer group model is there's a whole bunch of people thinking all the time, and we're constantly kind of revising and revising and revising. So this particular thing is an equipment rental playbook. It's 34 pages long. So this could be useful to you. It's actually a resource. So don't be intimidated by the size of it. But based on the phase or the in-between phase that you're in, we went through, obviously used ChatGPT. Then we went through it on top of that, and we evaluated different areas. So you can see just from looking at it, when we identify a phase, so let's say over on the right-hand side, it says early growth phase, which is B. Okay, so that means early growth. You can see like, okay, this is what you should be considering as a equipment rental tool operator. So if anybody wants a copy of this, we can push it over to you. One of the things we did do with this was we dropped it into a AI tool, which created a podcast. So we have 2 a woman named Peggy Peg for peer executive groups, and I think the other guy was Chet Chibita or something like that. So these two people talk back and forth through every phase and what rental needs to do, and it's only about 15 minutes long. So I can get you for those peer group members here, you'll be getting that podcast probably within 2 to 3 weeks. We actually have a interview with an AI consultant prior to that being released. But our podcast is called Peer Talk. It's on Spotify. We got about 60. Kyle's been on that. We've had about 60 different episodes over the years, and currently this year we're actually converting them into blogs, and we're gonna have about 25 blogs that are available to anyone who receives our newsletter. Does everybody here get a Peer Connector newsletter? If you don't get the Peer Connector newsletter, it's great for getting insight into what's happening with rental in the peer groups and also outside peer groups, who are some of the thought leaders in the industry. We identify that and different opportunities for you. So anyway, that is the presentation. Any questions or comments? You want to talk about the economy on any other level? Okay, so the way to use this is to say, and I'd be glad to do this with you, John, offline, but I would go back to this, which is your lead indicator. So you find it here. Is it 3 to 6 months in advance of your business? So you want to identify, like, let me see. Let's go with consumer sentiment, industrial production, CapEx, right? So industrial production, CapEx, non-residential momentum, manufacturing energy, 3 to 9 months in advance of you. So you just tag it onto, you take it here. So it should be something similar. Let's say probably the best one related to that would be CapEx would be the private manufacturing. So if that's 3 to 6 months out or 3 to 9 months out from yours, that would give you one thing to look at and say, well, if they're in recession and they're just coming into recovery in 27, what does that mean for my business? You might look at U.S. multi-housing starts differently and say, well, I'm going to tag myself to that. And so you're just going to put this in front of yours. So if you get the data, like, do you see the graph all the way to the left? So it says historical 1212. So that's actually the motion similar to your rate of change. So for just quick cheating, you can get this off the ITR website and then look at that graph, because that's you would match this graph against your rate of change, but you'd stick it out 3 to 6 months in advance of it and say, this is what potentially could happen to my business. But again, I would take the time to kind of go through and identify what you want to put, hang your hat on. And there's a reason why this is the construction U.S. economy thing, where they basically identified 9 indicators that they wanted to hang their hat on. I can tell you from booking ITR, did anybody go to AED this last week? Is anybody down there? Did you see the ITR presentation? Was it Taylor who did it? Yeah, so Taylor did it. So I can say from working with ITR, they will identify specifically. They'll say, well, this is construction, Dan. You want to do equipment rental, focus on these 3, and then we'll add in these 2 more. So there's ways. It's very expensive to work with them, so you got to have to decide what you want to do. But I would say a peer group or multiple peer groups could get together and do a deal, and we can pull that. But yeah, we'll talk offline, because I'd love to set you guys up and get you a couple lead indicators in front of your data. We had for the small manufacturing model, I'll never forget, we had some peer groups that actually got the data and then had it in front of their data, so you could see their rate of change, and then it was matching almost exactly with small manufacturing. So if you had an indicator around that. So sorry, Kyle, I went over. Time for break.